All right, good morning. Wish you all a happy secular new year. Everyone should have a healthy and happy and successful and prosperous and elevating new year. Even though it's a secular new year, it's still significant. So we should all, learn the lessons, and take with us all of the accomplishments and the lessons of this previous year, and apply it moving forward to become better people. Every day is a new opportunity. Okay, good to see you all. I'll see you next week. All right, so Parshas VaEra is we're now in the second portion of the book of Exodus, Parshas VaEra, and that really goes together with Parshas Bo. VaEra and Bo go together because the 10 plagues are tracked in these two portions, the 10 plagues. So what I want to do, I spent some time a number of years ago. I remember seeing a commentary, a very insightful commentary by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch about the 10 plagues in general. I know for myself that whenever I learn about the 10 plagues, I feel that sometimes they are disparate plagues, and I've never really appreciated the connection and the symmetry and the big picture plan of the 10 plagues. And this commentary of Samson Raphael Hirsch, he goes through all the 10 plagues and fits it into a big picture plan and a purpose. And I saw this commentary many, many years ago. I looked back over it over this past Shabbos, so I decided to make a chart, a table out of it. So I'm going to share the screen, and we're going to go through the 10 plagues, but not from the perspective of the details of them necessarily, but in the grand picture, in the grand scheme of what the 10 plagues were trying to achieve. Before I show the screen, the 10 plagues are, in one sense, are designed in order to punish the Egyptians for putting and persecuting the Jewish people, putting them through the exile of the 210 years of exile. So the Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch explains that the 10 plagues were cleverly and precisely designed to be a midah keneged midah, a measure for measure punishment for the Egyptians for what they did. But what they did, even we spoke about this a few weeks ago, about there were 4 or 5 things that the Medrash said of the actual afflictions that the Egyptians imposed upon the Jewish people, but they were more specific. The overarching methodology and strategy of the Egyptians against the Jewish people was to carry them through three phases of exile, starting with marginalization and gerus, as it's called. Gerus is not exiling. Gerus is marginalizing and estrangement of whoever the people are who was in your country. So, as we've seen historically during the Holocaust, Spanish Inquisition, persecution never begins dramatically and emphatically to start persecuting whoever people are they are expressing their anti-Semitism towards. It always starts off with a level of estrangement and marginalization of that group of people, that community. So the same thing with the Egyptians as well. This took over a period of 210 years altogether, but it started off with general estrangement, gerus, estrangement. Gerus is the meaning of is the translation, or is the Hebrew for estrangement. Then it went into actual slavery, putting the Jews under slavery, avdus, and then the final phase of the persecution was actual affliction, inui, affliction and harsh, terrible, painful affliction that they imposed upon the Jewish people. So those are the three phases, and the 10 plagues, Rav Hirsch explains, corresponds to those 3 phases. And the 10 plagues were a systematic operation to overturn the entire infrastructure and power of Egyptian civilization in a manner that perfectly mirrored the Egyptian mistreatment of the Jewish people. In the same way that the Egyptians gradually intensified their imposition upon the Jewish people from estrangement to abject affliction, so too the plagues followed the same pattern. Moreover, the plagues targeted and this is a very important aspect of it, they targeted every stratum of Egyptian existence, from the ground below to the atmosphere above, thereby totally eradicating every trace of power and prestige they once enjoyed. So, I said before that there are 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3, estrangement, slavery, and affliction. In the estrangement stage of it, the Egyptians made the Jews feel estranged. The goal of the plagues was to now reciprocally, midah keneged midah, Hashem to make the Egyptians feel themselves estranged and unsettled even in their own land. This is the measure for measure punishment. For the fact that they engaged in humiliation and enslavement of the Jewish people, that's the second phase, Hashem humiliated them and destroyed their sources of pride and power. And in response to the affliction that they imposed upon the Jewish people, so then Hashem's going to afflict them through abject pain and suffering. That's the structure of the 10 plagues. Now, we know in the Haggadah, one of the famous parts of the Haggadah is at the end of, before we wash for bread, at the end of the Haggadah, when we talk about the 10 plagues, after the recitation of the 10 plagues, the Haggadah says that the 10 plagues can be organized in three phrases. Datzach, Adash, Ba'achav. Datzach is for blood, frogs, and lice. Adash is for wild animals, pestilence, and boils. And Ba'achav is hail, locust, darkness, and the death of the firstborn. And the question is, why do we need to organize the plagues in these 3 series? So Rav Hirsch explains that because the goal of the plagues is to destroy Egypt from top to bottom, so each of these 3 series corresponds to the land, that's series number 1, the inhabitants upon the land, 2, and the third series is the sky. So that the plagues are going out to set a goal of destroying Egypt on all 3 stratums through the phases of estrangement, slavery, and affliction. They're targeting all of those 3 different categories. So let's go through them. Let's look, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at the first plague and the second plague and the third plague in each group. So the first phase of persecution was estrangement. They estranged the Jewish people. So Hashem now estranges and makes them unsettled in their own land. How does he do that? The very first plague is blood. Blood is the first, and that's that targets or either targets or emanates from the land. Obviously the land, the rivers. Because why is that the first plague? Because that's the source of their security. The Nile, they don't have regular rainfall in Egypt, and their whole source of agriculture and sustenance in Egypt was the Nile River. When that turns to blood, their entire source of security fails them. And there's no greater unsettling feeling than that. And now we no longer have our source of sustenance. So that's the first. So that's the estrangement, reciprocal, mida connected mida, measure for measure response that Hashem does to the Egyptians on the land level. In the second series of plagues, in the Adash series, the first one is also the same goal, but except on the inhabitants of the land. What are the inhabitants of the land? The wild animals. What's the significance of that? Because the fact that wild animals can now barge in to villages and residential areas and cities of Egypt, not staying within the boundaries of the wild outside of Egypt, outside of the cities of Egypt, the borders are broken. And there's nothing more unsettling than that, than the borders that provide safety are broken down. It's also targeting and creating this sense of estrangement and unsettlement in the minds of the experience of the Egyptians within their own land itself. And then the third series of plagues, the third series is the Be'achav. Same thing again, but in the sky. So what happens in the sky? The hail. What's the significance of the hail? The climate radically changes, making them feel like they're living in a different country altogether. So the target of the first plague of each of the 3 series is to create an estrangement for the Jewish people, for the Egyptians, an unsettled feeling in their own land. The second phase, the second plague of each series is now targeting the slavery that they impose upon the Jewish people. Now slavery comes about because they lord themselves over the Jewish people. That's what slavery is about, lording yourself over another person, humiliating that person, and enslaving the person. So Hashem does exactly the same thing. He humiliates and enslaves humiliates and destroys the pride of the Egyptians. He humiliates the Egyptians by bringing frogs. Why frogs? Because there's nothing more of a timid and small, timid animal than a frog. A frog is afraid. You go up to a frog will jump away and hide away. But the frogs have no shame whatsoever. They come right out and they land on people's heads, and they are sitting on the heads of Paro, on the head of Paro. Total humiliation, being menaced by small and timid creatures. This is all with the goal of humiliating and breaking down the pride of the Egyptians. In the second phase, where it's targeting the inhabitants of the land, second stratum, is the pestilence, because pestilence attacks the cattle and the horses. Their source of power and pride, they're all killed. That's also that their whole pride is being broken down. In the third series is against the sky, or coming from the sky, is the locusts, which cause destruction to the crops, which is the source of their riches. So everything in the second group are all targeting to the destruction of their pride and power and humiliating them. And the third series of plagues, the third plague in each group, is targeting the affliction that they afflicted the Jewish people with. So Hashem afflicts them, and it's very simple to see. The affliction on the land is the lice. I mean, the lice having lice all over you, which is a horrible, terrible discomfort, terrible affliction on the inhabitants of the land, i.e. the people themselves. Boils, terrible pain. And the third is in the sky, is terrible anguish of the darkness, which lasted for 3 days. The emotional and psychological anguish that they were put through that darkness for 3 days was an example of affliction emanating from the sky and targeting that measure for what the Egyptians did to the Jewish people. And that's the whole sequence of the plagues. And I thought it was really, to me at least, was very insightful. The last plague, of course, is the final all-encompassing blow of the death of the firstborn. Because the commentaries say that really the death of the firstborn really contained everything all in one. But so that's the final Makkah B'Patish, the final hammer blow, which brings about the Exodus. But this is how Rav Hirsch explains the sequence of the plagues and how they all fit into a bigger picture plan. And to me, this is other commentaries do the same thing, but this happened to really, I found a lot of insight into this. So this is number one. So that's the plagues. That's one thing. Now, while the plagues are also targeting the Egyptians specifically in this measure for measure punishment, we have to realize also another extremely important principle. And what I'm going to say now, I've said before, it's probably the most famous commentary of Nachmanides in the entire Torah. And that is the fact that the entire story of the plagues, the Exodus, the splitting of the Red Sea, the entire story, the entire episode is a profound and tremendous lesson for us to realize that Hashem is involved in the affairs of mankind. That's what the Ramban says is one of the purposes of this entire story. And the Ramban says over here, he says, while the 10 plagues were intended as a measure for measure response for the Egyptian treatment of the Jewish people, the message for the Jewish people themselves was to also instill in our minds and hearts the fundamental truths of how Hashem's providence works. He says at the end of Parshas Bo, there are various false theological beliefs that people have had throughout history. And the purpose of the 10 plagues, the Exodus, the revelation at Sinai, are all being orchestrated to negate those false beliefs. And what are the 3 primary false beliefs that people have had and do have today? There's atheism, which is no God whatsoever. There's the clockwork universe theory. What's the clockwork universe? That God created the universe, wound it up, and left. A creator who left, no longer having any awareness of it. Many people believe that. At least they make themselves believe that. When you start thinking about it, it doesn't make any sense. Why would God create this universe and leave it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but people make themselves to believe this in order to justify their free behavior to do what they want, how they want, whenever they want. But that's the psychology behind it. But then there are people actually who do ascribe to the belief of what's called deism, which is belief in a creator who's aware but does not intervene with the universe, let alone man. So he's aware of what's going on, but doesn't intervene. There are others who believe also deism perhaps can be broken into 2 categories, or there's another name for it, I don't know. But there's another belief that is that God is aware of the big picture functioning of the universe, but doesn't get involved with the details of human beings. But these beliefs are all the false theological beliefs about God, which obviously is antithetical to Judaism. And the Ramban says that the timed and targeted miracles of the Exodus from Egypt came to negate all these beliefs, showing that Hashem is aware of his world and does intervene with the affairs of man when he so pleases. Moreover, because these miracles were announced beforehand through the mouth of the prophet Moshe, the axiom that Hashem speaks to man and reveals his will is also demonstrated. This point in turn supports their belief in the revelation of Mount Sinai. So this is the importance of this whole story. This is so important. This is so axiomatic. This is so fundamental. Everything rests upon the plagues. Everything rests upon the exodus from Egypt. Everything rests upon this story. This is why we emphasize it so much. The Ramban goes on to say this. The reason why we emphasize the story of the Exodus, and it repeats itself so many times in the liturgy. Everything is a remembrance for the Exodus of Egypt. We make Kiddush on Friday night to remember the Exodus. We put on tefillin to remember the Exodus. We sit in the sukkahs to remember the Exodus. Why is such a big fanfare made about the Exodus? Because the Exodus represents and inculcates into our conscience all of these fundamentals of belief, that God punishes those who commit atrocities and crimes against humanity, even if it takes a long, we don't know exactly when judgment comes down. It's not our business to say when God should exact judgment and when he shouldn't exact judgment, but it happens. But the other principle is also that God sees what's going on. He's aware. This is not a clockwork universe. He's involved in our lives. He's involved in our lives, and everything which is happening is completely under his watchful eye, and there's not a single thing which is not interceded and aware of by God. Again, we don't understand the workings of God. It has nothing to do with that. We don't understand his ways, but that he knows is clearly demonstrated in the Exodus. So that's a very important introduction, which probably should always be emphasized at different junctures, because it's part of what we, there's actually a book I have over here. I was reading a chapter of this book. It's called The Encyclopedia of Moral and Ethical Values. I was reading it together with some people this week. There's a chapter over here, and it happened to be this week. I was reading it. It's called God, Is He Really Watching Us? He talks about over here this same idea. Is he really watching us? Well, of course he's really watching us. This is part of what we believe. This is the axioms of Judaism, as we just saw. But the question is why do we not believe it? Or how come we don't live with it? I mean, if God's really watching us, it would be like a child who has a parent or a kid in his classroom where the teacher the kid knows the teacher is there all the time. He's going to behave differently because he knows the teacher or the parent is watching over him. So people do deny this idea. They deny it. They go into this cognitive dissonance type of mode of denying these truths in order to justify their behavior. And that's what, whether it be deism or clockwork universe, those different things which the Ramban speaks about. Or also because the real reason is because Hashem gave us free will and a Yetzer Hara for the purpose of being able to overcome the darkness to see the light. That's the real reason why we don't always see it, because it's part of the challenge of life. We have to find God. We have to look for him. He didn't just make it easy for us to see. We have to be able to think and look and see and recognize that God is really behind everything which goes on. And those who know me from private sessions, I frequently talk about what's going on in the world at large. In case anyone didn't realize, there's been a pandemic for the past 2 years, right? But that alone is also an incredible forum for being able to teach us: is God really watching us? Is he seeing us? And how do we connect to God? And what is really going on behind the scenes? That's also very much when we believe that this is an independent power with an independent solution separate from God. That's antithetical to our philosophy, right? There's no independent power of the virus. There's no independent power of the vaccine, right? They're not independent. It's God controlling everything, but giving us different vehicles and sending us different messages through these different channels, but it's all ultimately Hashem. But I don't want to get into that larger different discussion. I just want to stay focused more on this message over here about the plagues, about the Exodus, all to teach us the axioms of Judaism. That's my little introduction to these two portions. This is applicable to both of these two portions. Very, very important. So with that, let me now dive into the. I want to dive into the last aliyah of VaEra and focus specifically on the seventh plague. It's easy to remember the seventh plague. You'll never forget this now. What's the seventh? What's in the seventh aliyah of the first portion of the plagues? The seventh plague. There you go. They don't follow it that way. That pattern is not followed with all the plagues, but it happens to be this way. This week it is. The borod. Borod is hail. So the Torah describes the the narrative of how Moshe was told by Hashem to tell Paro that if he doesn't agree to send the Jewish people out, then another plague is going to arrive, the seventh plague, the hail. And he describes the hail, what it's going to look like. And he says specifically that, and if you have a Chumash there, you can take a look, but it's in chapter 9 and verse 18. We'll start from 17. Verse 18. Behold, Moshe says to Paro, behold, at this time tomorrow, so he's standing there in front of Paro, and he says, at this time tomorrow, I shall rain a very heavy hail, such as there has never been in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. Now, tomorrow at this time exactly, hail is going to come down, he tells Paro. So the Rashi quotes from a Medrash. Rashi says that, to give a little bit of a fuller picture of what happened, he says, Sarat lo srita bakosal, that Moshe took a knife and he scratched a line in the wall in front of Paro. And he said, L'mocha, tomorrow, Keshatagia chama lakan, when the rays of light from the sun, when the rays of the sun reaches this spot precisely, exactly this spot, Yerid habarad, the hail is going to fall down, is going to come down from the heavens. Exactly when the ray of light hits this spot, the hail is going to come down. He wanted to show Paro that, again, God is in total control, and this is not an accident, and we have total control. Now, fine. The problem with it, when you think about this, it didn't occur to me until I saw this question raised by one of the commentaries. There's a technical problem with that. The technical problem with it is if he's telling Paro, when the sun's rays hit this spot precisely tomorrow, that's when the hail is going to come down. The technical geological problem with it is the fact that hail comes from where? Where does hail come from? Hail comes from the clouds. You need clouds for hail. So what do the clouds do in the sky? They cover the sun. You can't see the sun when the clouds are out. So how can Moshe say that precisely this moment when the sun's rays hit this spot, the hail's going to come down? It's impossible. Because it takes time for the clouds to gather together for the hail to come down, unless you'd say, well, miraculously, in the snap of a finger, as soon as the rays of sun hit that spot, all of a sudden, in a snap of a finger, all of a sudden the skies became covered by clouds, and then the hail came down. Maybe you could say that. I didn't think of that until this second right now. That's possibly what you could say. Although, what I'm going to say, right, I saw different commentaries explain this, but what I thought of myself is the following. That's the question, right? How could the hail have come immediately when the sun's rays hit that spot? So I'm going to give a different answer to what I just said then a second ago. If you go further down in the passage describing the hail, so there was a miraculous nature of this hail. This wasn't regular hail. No matter how big these pieces of hail were, it wasn't regular hail. Verse 24 says, there was hail and fire flaming amid the hail. There was fire inside the hail. Very heavy, such that it had never been seen in the entire land of Egypt. This was a miraculous hail, which had like ice and then fire inside of it, right? Pretty serious stuff, right? And that's what came down. So it was a miraculous phenomenon. There wasn't regular hail, miraculous hail, fire and ice all mixed together. So where else do we see a phenomena of fire and ice mixed together, or fire and water mixed together? Is there anything else in the world, in nature, where we see a combination of fire and water? So there is another example. The Gemara says, Medrash says as well, that the Gemara asks about what is the meaning of the word Shemayim? Shemayim is the Hebrew for the word heaven. The heavens above is called Shemayim, right? Shemayim is the word for heaven. So the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the word Shemayim? What does it mean exactly? So the Gemara says that Shemayim is actually an amalgam of two words. She is for Eish, which is fire, and mayim is water. So the word for heaven, shemayim, is an amalgam of fire and water. So it's really quite an interesting idea that the heavens themselves have this combination, this blending together of fire and water. We'll see more what this means in a few minutes, but at least on the superficial initial level, the heavens are made up of fire and water, fire and water. So if that's the case, so there, and we're seeing now that the hail itself was made up of fire and water, it stands to reason that where did the hail come from? The hail, this is miraculous hail. It didn't come from clouds, because clouds only produce regular hail of just ice. If the heavens themselves are made up of fire and water, and the hail is fire and water, presumably the hail didn't come from the clouds, it came from the heavens themselves. So that's why the sun could be shining brightly when this hail comes down. Miraculous hail, which didn't require clouds to produce it, because it came from the heavens, which also is made of fire and water, and it produced the ice and water and the hail, and it came pelting down upon the Egyptians. So therefore, that answers the question, how could Moshe say, he scratched the line, he said, when the rays of sun hit this spot, because it will be a bright sunny day, at that precise moment, the heavens themselves, made up of fire and water, are going to generate pellets of hail made up of fire and water, and it's going to come down upon you. And that explains that. But the question really is what is this message over here? What is this? Why is the heavens made up of fire and water? Why is the hail made up of fire and water? What's the message behind this? Why did Hashem want to do this with the hail? And what is the message that the heavens made up of fire and water? So the Medrash says that the same Medrash goes on to say that the reason why, let me read this inside. Oh, it's over here. The Medrash likens the phenomena of the fire and water in the hail. It likens it to the phenomena of the merging of the fire and ice in the hail to two rival groups who were forever in feud with each other until the need arose for them to fight for their country. Right? They're two rival groups and they are always fighting, but then the king says, we need you to fight the battle against our enemy nation. So the king made peace between them, whereupon they fought together in unison. So too Hashem made peace between the two conflicting forces of fire and water for the sake of battling Mitzrayim. That was the idea, that to show how bad the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians were, he took these two opposing elements of fire and water, combined them, made peace between them, brought them together, and pelted them with the hail. And that's the idea of the hail having the fire and water. You know, what it really bespeaks, what it really tells us is the idea of two opposing forces putting aside, two different ideas, two different forces, putting aside their differences for the common good. That's the message of this. Now, you have to realize fire and water are not both intrinsically good or bad. Right? Fire is not bad and good. It depends what it's applied for. And water also is not bad or good. It depends what it's used for. You put them together, they can really extinguish each other and they can hurt each other. But when two people or two beings, two disparate groups are able to put aside their differences and work together in harmony for a common good, that's the greatest, the greatest form of peace. It's the greatest it's the greatest thing imaginable. When we go back to the heavens and see that the heavens are also made up of fire and water, it's saying the same thing. And in fact, there's other midrashim which give us many examples. Another midrash says that another midrash expounds on a pasuk, on a verse in Song of Songs. It says that it says, "Go forth and gaze, O daughters of Zion." It says in this verse, "Go forth and gaze, O daughters of Zion, upon King Shlomo, upon King Solomon." Now, when it says King Shlomo, King Solomon, Melech Shlomo, the word Shlomo, Solomon, is actually the same word as Shalom, of peace. So the Medrash actually expounds the verse and says, it doesn't just simply mean go forth and gaze upon King Solomon, but going forth, gaze at the king, i.e. Hashem, who makes Shalom, who makes peace. Gaze at how much Hashem makes peace in the heavens. And the Medrash goes on to give about 7 or 8 examples of how Hashem makes peace between two opposing forces. For example, fire made peace with Abraham in the fiery furnace when he was thrown into the fiery furnace, didn't destroy him. The sword, the knife, made peace with Yitzchak, Isaac at the Akedah, at the binding of Isaac, didn't kill him. The angels made peace with Yaakov in his fight with the angels. But now to the heavenly realms, the Chayos, the word Chayos is a classification of heavenly angels. And it says the Chayos are made of fire and the firmament are made of snow. I mean, these are Kabbalistic ideas, but the moral message is very clear. Another example, the archangel Michael, is made of snow, and his counterpart, Gabriel, the archangel Gabriel, is made of fire, and they work together. They work in unison together. Fire and water, fire and snow. And also, even the angels themselves, the Medrash says, that each angel, whatever this means, angels are obviously not physical, this is all representative, symbolic, but it says that each angel consists of a combination of fire and water. But yet the angel itself is able to function as a whole unit despite the disparate entities within it. The throne of glory, the Kisei HaKavod, is made up of fire and water. And it gives other examples as well. The firmament is made of fire and water. So other examples. All of these examples that Hashem makes peace in the heavens. He takes two separate, different, very, very antithetically different elements and brings them together in peace. And also, another Medrash says, even just to illustrate the power of peace, it says, "Gadol Shalom, great is peace." Even if the Medrash says, when a Jewish army fights against an enemy, people have to realize this. When we are commanded to fight a war for God, in biblical times when they fought all these wars in conquering the land, people tend to forget this, that they're obligated by the Torah to make overtures of peace to the people that they're attacking before they have to make peace with them first. And if the enemy nation doesn't want to make peace, so then that's when battles ensue. But it's a mitzvah to make peace first. And the Medrash then says, because even for example, another example of making peace is like even the Aliyahs. When you get called up to the Torah, we know we have a Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. That sequence is all. I mean, and the Mishnah goes on to give other examples, all these different examples in law and Jewish law and halacha of how peace and making peace is so important. But then it concludes the whole piece by saying, "Oseh shalom bimromov," and this is a familiar line which we say at the end of davening. "Oseh shalom bimromov, hu yaseh shalom aleinu." And I can't say it out of context. I say it every single day, 3 times a day. Now I can't even say it. Okay, but Oseh shalom bimromov, he makes peace in the heavens. That's the expression. When you take a step back, this is exactly what he's doing. That when he's making peace in the heavens, God is taking fire and water and melding them together to make peace of the two, to bring them together. And the Medrash says, if the heavenly creatures, which have no capacity for jealousy or hatred or rivalry, are nonetheless in need of divinely arranged peace, then with regard to the earthly beings who are entirely prone to hatred and rivalry and jealousy, all the more so are they in need of peace. Right? So this is the message. The message is so powerful. Right? The message is that we need, I know all of us sitting here today, and we're all of people of like-minded understanding that we get along. We have to all get along. And I think that we have a great group over here. We all get along so well with all the different personalities, different backgrounds, and I think that's really I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but we all have our little situations in life and our personal lives where our differences do get in the way. Differences do get in the way, and we do feel this, and sometimes it's impossible not to have happen, that we all throughout life, at some point or other, we feel like I'm water, he's like fire, he's water, I'm fire, and we can't get along, and it feels that way, and it can get very, very divisive. And the message of all of this is that Hashem makes peace. Hashem is able to take the different elements, opposing elements, and bring them together when it's a common good. When it's for a common good, putting aside the differences to learn to live in harmony with each other. And I want to read to you something else. I saw this quote over here. Shalom, which is peace, also the Green's son and grandson. Shalom actually means much more than peace in the sense of an absence of hostilities. It means a peaceful wholeness born of harmony and cooperation, imbued with a spirit of mutual respect for one another's contribution. It may be that the various members of the unit differ in many ways, their abilities, their points of view, their fields of endeavor, but when each one contributes to the betterment of the whole without impeding or denigrating the other, they are in a state of shalom. Isn't that's what this is? what we should be striving for, we should all be thinking about, and not allowing the differences to create divisiveness, but let the differences be respected, and brought together when there's a common goal of whatever the common goal may be. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. I want to address that in a second. But I want to just go now. Why did the Mitzrayim need to hit them? Going back to the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, they're being pelted by this message. They're being pelted by these blocks, these blobs of hail, crying out the message, peace, peace, harmony. It stands to reason. I mean, obviously, we went through the 10 plagues before, showed how the Egyptians estranged the Jewish people. They lorded themselves over the Jewish people. I mean, these things don't happen unless you can't live in peace with people. When you can't live in peace with people and you can't tolerate another person's existence next to you, so you have to lord yourself. Either you run away, you lord yourself over them, and you estrange them, you persecute them. So there's no greater example of a nation that failed to recognize, that failed to practice the art of peace and acceptance than the Egyptians at that time. So if we were standing in Goshen back then, and we were in the safety of Goshen as Jewish people, watching the hail coming down upon the Egyptians, we'd be saying, whoa, it's unbelievable, look at that. 210 years they've been estranging us, and they can't live with us, they hate us, they can't deal with us, and they can't live in harmony with us with all the good we can bring to them. And look at that, they're being pelted with fire and water. God is banging into their heads a message. You have the ability to be able to live in harmony with someone who is different to you. And it's coming from the heavens. Look at that, unbelievable, the heavens, which is also crying out that message, live in harmony with people who are different from you. And all this is coming down, is merging into these pellets of ice and banging on their heads. Wow, that's great. They're really getting the lesson strong over here. And that's the kind of reaction we would have if we saw that. Right? That's the idea. There's one more point, though. There's a part of this medrash also says the following. What was the exact nature of the mixture of the ice and fire of the hail? So the Medrash gets into this very granular detail of exactly what that mixture looked like. It's a machlokas. It's one opinion, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia. One said that the mixture was like there was fire in the middle, and it was surrounded by ice on the outside, like a pomegranate pit. It says like a pomegranate pip, that it's like this translucent cover on the outside, and the pip is on the inside. That was one opinion. The other opinion said that the fire and water were all intermingled, all as one together, right? So I was curious to think, what's the message of that? So I once heard, someone once pointed out that when it comes to harmony with people, there's actually two ways to create harmony with people. There's actually two ways to do it. One is what's called compartmentalized partnership, and the other is called collaborative partnership. And this applies to businesses, it applies to relationships. And what's compartmentalized partnership? It's where we are together for a common goal. That's true. We could have got a common goal, but you take care of this part of the job, and I'll take care of this part of the job. Like in business, that's how a business works well that way. You can't have everyone, everyone's fingers in everyone else's pot. It doesn't work. You have to, everyone has to have their particular assigned responsibility. And as long as we're all working for the same goal, that's called compartmentalized partnership. And that is really, that's how you could possibly look at that opinion that says that the fire was compartmentalized into a space within itself and surrounded by the ice on the outside. Peace, harmony of the two separate entities, but they're compartmentalized, and that's good. It's healthy, nothing bad about that. But there's a higher level of partnership, and sometimes this doesn't work in certain contexts, and that is what's called collaborative partnerships, but we're both doing the things together as one. We're doing it together as one. There is no separate. I always like to say, I always like to say, I think about in relationships, marriages. It's not a rule, but generally speaking, men tend more towards compartmentalized partnerships with their spouses. And women tend more towards collaborative. For example, the woman the wife wants to do the shopping together with the husband. Let's shop together. Let's choose the decor together. Let's choose together. Let's tidy up together. Let's kind of do the dishes together. I feel much more. A man likes to do his thing. and he wants you take care of this, I'll take care of this, and we'll kind of work together. So it's not a rule, but sometimes you see this. Now, both are good. Both are at least both are, even the compartmentalized partnership. It's under one roof and one goal. But that's the difference between the two. The Gemara says, there's a Gemara which says that someone who has a dream of a river, a kettle, and a bird, right, can look forward to peace in his life. A river and a kettle and a bird. There was a book written about this, actually about marriage, called The River, Kettle, and a Bird. But it says, it's from a Gemara, the one who dreams about a river, a kettle, and a bird can look forward to peace in his life. And the explanation of this, given by a certain more contemporary rabbi, Rabbi Aaron Feldman, in his book called The River, Kettle, and the Bird, he explains that the nature of a river is an entity which facilitates peace between two parties. Ships travel along a river, boats travel along a river. But the only purpose that the river serves is only to facilitate the mutual benefit that the two ships have. There is no unity between the two ships. They're not on a common goal. They're just traveling along the same stream of water, and that river is providing mutual benefit. That kind of peace is, albeit peaceful, and they get along with each other, but it's, they're very separate from each other. The next level is the kettle, and the kettle is more reminiscent of the first opinion about the hail, compartmentalized partnership, because a kettle takes the fire and the water, right? And the fire and the water are still separate from each other, but the kettle is able to combine the two of them together for the common good of making a cup of tea. But the kettle is not, there's no merging of the two things. They're still separate from each other. And the third level, which is the highest level, is the complete melding into one, with one identity, with one function, is the bird, because the bird has this unique strength, this unique capacity of being able to fly in the sky as well as walk on the ground. These are two diametrically opposed skills. How can you fly and walk? We can't fly, and so they can fly and they can walk effectively on the ground. They can fly in the sky. That's all merged together in the one body of the bird. And that symbolizes this complete merging together of peace, of two disparate entities, of fire and water coming together. And that could be the second opinion of the Medrash, that the fire and the water and the hail were all merged together as one. That's the ultimate level of peace. But the message, in general, the whole message over here is that, to accept people, to accept others. And we all have people in our lives. There's always people in our lives that we have this difficulty of accepting them. And our wish and goal is that we should is to become closer, get closer to focusing on the common goal. There's a story I heard. There was this true story of these two neighbors who never got along. They just never got along with each other, and they hated each other's guts. In fact, it was the kind of situation where one guy left his trash can outside of on his sidewalk, 1 inch over, encroaching upon the other guy's property. So the other guy comes along and kicks the trash can back into the other guy's property. They can't tolerate each other the slightest. And this went on for years. They never got along. They just never got along. And one day in a storm, I think it was actually during Hurricane Sandy, a tree came crashing down and crashed down on both of their houses equally. And, it wasn't one person's fault. It was nature's fault, so to speak. So they came out, they were just after the storm was over, they came out and they looked at each other and they both said to each other, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about this? What shall we do? And it was the first time that they were able to come together and begin to see that they can actually work together for a common goal. I've seen my personal, experience that couples have come to me and that this has been happening the last several weeks. In the secular New Year and the Christmas holidays, everyone gets together for the holiday meals, and it's been interesting. I had two couples this week, right? That they, non-Jewish couples, and they, for weeks, for months, not able to get along. They're having struggles getting along with each other, right? And they both reported to me the same week that things have been much better. So I said, why? So they said, well, they don't completely different. They don't know each other. They both went to holiday parties, Christmas gatherings with their families, and those families, the respective families, were hostile toward, they had hostility towards them. And they had to deal with that hostility towards them as a couple. And they both succeed in dealing, wisely dealing with those hostile families that they had. And it worked out very well. They were able to kind of deal with it in an effective way. But they said, we feel much closer together now. We feel much closer. And they said, we as a couple have now so much closer with each other because of that. But it's an example of this happens all the time. When we have a common goal and we try to kind of put aside and then work on that common goal and bring harmony, to achieve harmony in that way, and then to use that as a springboard to then bring further harmony when that potential hostility goes away, that's what we have to do with that experience. But I want to end off by making one warning, because sometimes this can be taken to a wrong the wrong level, and that is sometimes you can take you can partner with somebody or with a situation where really you shouldn't be partnering with that situation with that person. And then you justify it based upon a common good, that you create a common good. Harmony and peace always has to be predicated on truth and justice, right? Without truth, without what the halacha says, what Hashem says, what the Torah says, you can't have peace. You can't create your own common goal and justify partnerships and relationships which are not sanctioned by the Torah. It first has to be sanctioned by the Torah as being truthful, as being just, and then peace and harmony can ensue. And that's really it's really said explicitly. The last Mishnah in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos, it says that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel used to say, on three things the world endures. This is in contrast to the first Mishnah of the chapter where it says on three things the world stands. People are familiar with that one. The world stands on the pillars of kindness, truth, and service. That's the one which is more familiar. But the last Mishnah in the chapter says the world endures upon three things. The world has durability based upon three principles: justice, truth, peace. So telling. Peace comes last. Justice first, truth. I'm not sure why the order justice and truth versus justice, but justice and truth, then followed by peace. Because only when peace is followed, only when the common goal is a goal of justice and a goal of truth, then you can have peace, even with the most antithetical entities of fire and water. So may we be zocha this coming year. Let this 2022 be a year of harmony and peace, of putting aside our differences towards a common goal, which is a truthful common goal. And may we all live in harmony with each other. And that's, mitzvah Hashem, see the ultimate harmony of heaven and earth and humanity and civilization and history with the coming of the Mashiach very quickly.